What a thrill it was to have this long-admired painting by David Shepard of a wise old elephant suddenly come to life right before our eyes in one of East Africa's wildlife parks, which Robbins and Meg Barstow had the fabulous experience of visiting in 1978. All my life I have been fascinated by the non-human wildlife on our shared planet. As a young boy, I loved going to zoos like the Bronx Zoo in New York to see wondrous animals like this African elephant. Even though I felt sorry for their being captives behind bars and fences, this was the only way that I could encounter them at that time. I nourished the dream of someday being able to see them in their natural habitat, wild and free. But it was not until our own children were grown up and my wife and I revisited the historic Bronx Zoo in 1978 that this dream was able to be realized. Robbins and Meg Barstow from Wethersfield, Connecticut, found that the zoo had been expanded and enhanced by providing more natural outdoor settings for some of the animals. We learned that the New York Zoological Society was sponsoring a special 4-week African wildlife safari trip to the countries of Tanzania and Kenya, where we could at long last see elephants and hippos and rhinos and lions in their real natural habitat. So we seized the day and started preparing for what was to be for us the supreme experience of a lifetime on planet Earth. For me, it went back exactly 50 years to a book called Safari, written in 1928 when I was just 9 years old by Osa and Martin Johnson. It had marvelous close-up photos of large African mammals, which I used to trace for my first wildlife notebook. Another one of my early heroes was Carl Ackley, the author of Adventures in the African Jungle. Actually, over more than half a lifetime, we had gathered a huge collection of books about African wildlife, which had introduced us not only to the tremendous variety of animals, but also to the magic names of the magnificent locales where these beasts dwelt in the wild. The African plains, animals of East Africa, the end of the game for African elephants, wildlife in crisis, endangered species, an artist in Africa with great paintings by British artist David Shepard, In the Shadow of Kilimanjaro, Serengeti, Kingdom of Predators, with color photos by renowned naturalist George Schaller, the fervent affirmation that Serengeti shall not die, The African Experience by Peter Matheson, Among the Elephants by Ian Douglas Hamilton, whose jungle elephant playground we were actually going to visit, Portraits in the Wild by Cynthia Moss, whom we were going to see and talk with in person at her elephant research camp, and finally, the Field Guide to the Mammals and Birds of East Africa, which we would take with us to help us identify all of the different species we expected to see. Africa is a large continent, which until after World War II consisted mostly of European colonies. The two countries we were to visit, straddling the equator in Central East Africa, Kenya and Tanzania, did not gain their independence until the 1960s. Mount Kilimanjaro is just inside the border of Tanzania. By 1978, less than 20 years after becoming independent republics, both Tanzania and Kenya had strongly committed themselves to preserving their wildlife through an extensive system of national parks. We visited 4 in Tanzania and 8 in Kenya. Driving down the Merritt Parkway from our suburban home in Wethersfield, Connecticut, en route to Kennedy Airport on our July 13th departure date, we were filled with eager anticipation. With our suitcases full and with all kinds of photographic and travel paraphernalia, we headed in to board our British Airways 747 jumbo jet. The first leg of our long intercontinental journey took us from New York to London on an overnight flight. Then, after a brief airport rest, we embarked on an even longer flight across southern Europe and then over northern Africa all the way to Kilimanjaro Airport across the equator in Tanzania. We saw the sun rise over the Mediterranean and got a glimpse of the Nile River after a refueling stop in Khartoum, Sudan. Most of the way we were flying high above the clouds, but it was exciting when, for the first time in our lives, we crossed the imaginary line of the equator into the southern hemisphere, even at 30,000 feet. As we neared our destination, we experienced the thrill of sighting a distant mountain top above the clouds. It was Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa, and as we got nearer, its double-peaked profile almost took on the appearance of a giant whale floating on a white sea of clouds. Finally, the plane descended through the clouds, and we found ourselves skimming above the ground and making a dramatic landing at the newly opened Kilimanjaro Airport in Tanzania. Just setting foot for the first time on African soil was an emotional experience for both Meg and me. Here we were, at long last, about to set forth on our incredible African odyssey. We immediately felt that Tanzania does indeed welcome the world with the Swahili greeting, Karibuni. After going through customs, the 20 members of our special tour group found waiting for us just outside the airport the fleet of mini buses, which were to be our primary mode of transportation for the next 4 weeks. There were welcoming banners on the roadway as we left the airport and headed into the countryside. The first animals we saw were domesticated cattle being herded along the road, but before long our vans left the main highway and headed up a long, bumpy dirt road through a variety of rural countryside and farmland to the paradise-like jungle location where we were to spend our first night in Africa. At the end of the road we found ourselves surrounded by lush plants and trees in a green mansion setting, which was the site of the Mount Muro Lodge, formerly the headquarters of a large plantation. As we walked across the rustic bridge over a small stream covered with brightly colored flowers and climbed the forest stairway to the lodge, all our senses were almost overwhelmed by this awesome atmosphere. On the lodge steps we were greeted by the current owner, a British engineer and architect named Michael Leach, who had made this magical, mystical place an overnight stopping point for tourist groups from around the world. On cloudless days, we were told, one could look across the terraced garden in front of the mansion and see Mount Kilimanjaro. Beyond the gardens, off to the left, beside a small pond, there was a large tree, which was the nesting site for literally hundreds of beautiful white herons. From time to time, a heron would fly off and then return with a twig or straw to add to its nest. Later, we went out for a short walk, and we got just glimpses of our first animal life. They were colobus monkeys, high in the treetops, leaping from branch to branch almost invisibly. The next morning, our group's 4 minibuses started out for our first day of adventures with African wildlife. And what a day it would turn out to be. After a brief visit to the post office in the small town of Arusha, we headed down the highway toward our first national park, and suddenly there in the distance we saw our first game, a tall giraffe meandering across an open field. Further down the road, a pack of wild zebra ran across right in front of us. And then we saw an ostrich trotting through the grass in this unfenced open countryside. When we saw the first legendary baobab tree, we immediately understood why they are said to have been planted upside down with their roots in the sky. Coming to a major crossroads, our excitement grew as we saw the fabled names on the signpost, with distances measured in kilometers. Finally, our vans arrived at the hillside entrance to Lake Manyara National Park. What an awesome view it offered. Sitting on a rock beside the entrance was a large baboon, greeting us as if he were a Chamber of Commerce representative. Then up the hill came the biggest thrill so far, the sighting of a lone bull elephant with white tusks flapping his giant ears, the first one I had ever seen in the wild. Midway up the high escarpment which borders the park, we used binoculars to view the lushly forested hillside and to note the spectacular location of the hotel we would be staying at, right on the rim of the steep slope. This spot gave us a panoramic view of the great Rift Valley, which harbors the park's unique combination of forest, woodland, grassland, swamp, and the broad, shallow lake which gives the park its name. The hotel was a fine modern building with comfortable accommodations designed to meet the needs and tastes of tourists from around the world. Meg and I were especially attired as we stood outside our hotel room overlooking the vast valley where soon we were to encounter the incredible profusion of animal and bird life which makes Lake Manyara one of the world's most fabulous wildlife habitats. Before leaving Connecticut, Meg had made 2 special light green safari jackets with all kinds of extra pockets, which we took great pleasure in wearing throughout the trip. After meeting the chief park warden, Mr. Benjamin Kanza, the members of our group again boarded our special vans and set out on our first actual game drive, a guided ride through a designated park area for the express purpose of viewing and photographing wildlife. The vans we rode in were designed and built just for this purpose. Each vehicle held 5 passengers with 3 pairs of seats, 2 in the rear, 2 in the middle, and 1 in the front beside the driver, so that every rider had a window seat. Another special feature of these vans was the large opening in the middle of each roof, which enabled passengers on occasion to stand with their heads out and take unimpeded snapshots, as Meg did for us, or to take movies, as I did, when not using binoculars. Just beyond the entrance gate of the park, there was a small clearing where we were able to observe a family of baboons foraging in the grass, and also to get a good view of a warthog with its curled tusks and ugly snout. We were intrigued to see it get down on its front knees some of the time to nibble the grass and dig for roots. The first big game we saw on this afternoon's drive was a large elephant with a broken tusk standing just by itself near the road. We wondered what its life story might be. Next we came upon a tall giraffe, which we recognized as being a Maasai giraffe, as distinguished from the reticulated species of giraffe, which we would see later in Kenya. It was accompanied by a smaller, younger giraffe, which appeared to be its adolescent offspring. Then we saw our first wild rhinoceros off in the middle of a field. We were just as glad not to have it come too close. As we approached the lakeside, we saw a small herd of Cape buffalo grazing in the marsh, and then at the edge of the lake we found a great profusion of birds, and in the water beyond them a group of hippos, one of them raising its head above the surface and opening its mammoth mouth. The most beautiful animals we saw on this first drive were the impala, the most graceful of all African antelopes. The males have exquisitely curved lyre-like horns. First we watched this bachelor herd walk by in supreme dignity and grace, and then we came across a breeding herd of females, which have no horns, kept together by a single male who guarded his harem from a small mound in the center. We saw many storks and vultures in the tops of the acacia trees as we moved on to another part of the forest where we were to experience one of our most exciting encounters. Our safari's first sight of a wild lion was this magnificent black-maned male up in a tree. This was the home of Manyara's famed tree-climbing lions, and during the heat of the day they would often climb up to these easily accessible roosts to watch the scene below or just sprawl out on a branch for a rest. We were fascinated watching this impressive king of beasts as he moved around in his tree branch lair. But when I put my head up through the rooftop opening of our van to get a better picture, suddenly he let out a loud roar. So we rapidly drove off in search of the nearby elephant's stamping ground. When the van stopped here for picture taking, we found ourselves looking at not just one, but whole families of wild African elephants. We were right in the midst of the very elephants which the Scottish researcher Ian Douglas Hamilton had studied in this area for 5 years. What a thrill it was to be, if only for a short while, as he titled his famous book, Among the Elephants. We hated to leave this wary mother and her very, very young calf. But we continued on to another part of the park, which seemed to have been taken over by giraffes. We were impressed by the awkward dignity with which they walked, and also by how fast they could run. There were many young giraffes here, some lying on the ground, and we could see that it was no easy task for them to untangle their long legs and stand up. As we wondered what the view must be like from such a height, something quite unexpected occurred. In the underbrush beside the road, we saw a rhino. And then, as we watched the giraffes along the side of the lake, 2 rhinos came charging in among them, scattering the giraffes in all directions. This caused all kinds of excitement, but on the way back, tragically, we came across what apparently had spooked the rhinos. It was the fresh carcass of a large rhinoceros which had very recently been killed by poachers. We were tremendously shocked at this gruesome sight. Both the brain and the horns of this magnificent beast had been crudely cut out and removed from its blood-covered head. Our driver pointed out the bullet holes in the animal's side which had ended its life. Rhino horns bring huge sums on the black market because of their supposed aphrodisiac qualities, and we now had seen firsthand why seeking to stop poaching has been one of the most difficult challenges facing the managers of East Africa's parks. Some of this film footage was later used by the World Wildlife Fund to help raise money to protect African rhinos. Vervet monkeys in the trees overhead as we departed Manyara National Park seemed to echo our exclamations over what a first day of African wildlife adventures this had been. 10 different major species of animals all in one park in one day. It took us another day to recover from our sensory overload and to travel to our next overnight stop, which was to be the incredible Ngorongoro Crater Lodge. This lodge is located right on the rim of one of the most amazing natural wonders in the world, a gigantic circular crater 2,000 feet deep and 10 miles in diameter, encompassing 100 square miles of flat grassland, woods, and lake, which can only be described as a living Garden of Eden. The crater is what remains of a collapsed ancient volcano of near record size. Sunrise over the crater is an awesome sight, because within the high walls surrounding this self-contained equatorial paradise resides one of the most evenly balanced populations of wildlife anywhere on Earth. A large portion of the approximately 25,000 animals who dwell here spend all or most of their lives on the crater floor, where human habitation has been prohibited. All visitors were required to travel in special Land Rover Jeeps, and as the vehicles wound their way down the steep roadways along the cliffside, we keenly appreciated our trained driver's skills. After briefly reconnoitering at the bottom of the slope, we got our cameras ready and proceeded across this vast habitat which so dramatically exhibited its natural wildlife balance of predator and prey. Here, for the first time, we saw large herds of zebras mixed in with their fellow ungulates, the wildebeest. Together they constitute a prime food for the crater's predators, and here is one of the chief predators, the hyena. To maintain population stability, there must be thousands of grass-eating herbivores to provide food for a few hundred meat-eating carnivores, and the largest of the predators here is the magnificent lion, with its tawny hide blending perfectly with his tall yellow grass. These shots were taken without a telephoto lens. Not far away we saw another smaller prey species, the Thompson's gazelles, with the crater walls towering behind them. And when we reached the edge of the crater's great lake, on the far side we could see hippos temporarily out of the water. On a beautiful hillside overlooking the lake, we all stopped for a picnic lunch with a background of unparalleled scenic grandeur. Tree, water, rocks, grass, we were almost overwhelmed by the magic enchantment of this fantastic African setting. What a supreme example of God's earthly creation. Passing a clump of trees on our way back, we had a good opportunity to observe the distinguishing characteristics of the African elephant. It is a different species from the more readily domesticated Indian elephant, which has much smaller ears and a high square forehead. African elephants like this fine specimen have very large flapping ears and a rounded forehead, as well as generally larger tusks. A pair of ostriches bid us farewell as we left Ngorongoro Crater. En route to our next destination, we passed a herd of domestic cattle, which properly have the right-of-way in this protected area outside the park. We made a brief stop at Old Duvai Gorge, the world-famous site where in 1959 Dr. Louis Leakey and his wife Mary discovered the skull of a human-like creature believed to be over 2 million years old. It was then the earliest known humanoid predecessor of present-day human beings. After this, our minivans headed cross-country toward the fabled Serengeti Plains. Ever since childhood, the name Serengeti had had a magical sound to it. All our lives we had heard and dreamed about this special area in East Africa, which is the home of the largest numbers of different varieties of wildlife any place on planet Earth. A superb starling was showing off its brilliantly colored luster when we arrived at the Nabi Hill entrance gate. Meg and I wanted the thrill of entering on foot when, at long last, for the very first time, we crossed the threshold into the Tanzanian wonderland of Serengeti National Park. As the vans proceeded past amber fields of grass, we immediately began to encounter large numbers of antelope of different species. First across the roadway scampered a troop of black-striped Thompson's gazelles. Then we encountered a hartebeest, demanding respect for its right-of-way before moving on and showing off its unique four-pronged profile with 2 tall ears sticking out below its curved horns. He seemed to have a family nearby. Suddenly, a huge giraffe galloped across the road right in front of the van, so close we could almost touch it. The next species we saw was a kind of antelope called the topee. We enjoyed watching a pair of young males engaged in some playful head-butting and horn testing. After an hour-long drive, we were glad to see the welcoming banner announcing our approach to Serenera. Serengeti National Park is a tremendous natural preserve extending up to the Tanzanian-Kenyan border, and Serenera is its heart. The park encompasses more than 5,000 square miles, and it contains the greatest and most spectacular concentration of plains animals anywhere in the world. They are counted in the millions and include more than 35 different species. The fabulous Serenera Wildlife Lodge is built right in among a large outcropping of huge rocks. From the wide picture windows on the veranda of the great high-ceiling dining room, one looks directly out over the Serengeti Plains. By incredible good fortune, our visit happened to coincide with a visit from the Tanzanian Minister of National Parks, whom we had the honor to meet and talk with. Accompanying him was the world-famous international wildlife conservationist Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, whom we saw drive off in this jeep for a special game viewing tour. Serenera was the base from which the American naturalist and author George Schaller had conducted his extensive pioneering field studies of the African lion. The Serengeti Research Institute had been opened here in 1973 by Tanzania's first president, Julius Nyerere, and research was now being carried out by a number of native Tanzanians. We were greatly impressed by the work they were doing and their continuing dedication to the cause of conservation in their country. And these are the animals about which so many books, photographs, films, and television programs have been made in the years since Serengeti became a national park in 1951. In this kingdom of predators, even giraffe occasionally fall prey to the lion, and we found this partially devoured carcass being guarded by a lioness, while others rested nearby, and in the trees above the vultures awaited their turn. Then we came across a lion nursery, where a mother was calmly lying in the grass with some young cubs, and then rolled over on her back with her hind leg lifted up so the cubs could nurse. The lions in the Saranera Valley have become so used to vehicles that they barely raise their heads when we drive up to them, though we were warned never to set foot out of the car, or they might suddenly turn ferocious at the unaccustomed sight of an unenclosed human. Soon we had our first glimpse of the unparalleled panorama of the vast Serengeti Plains, being traversed by hundreds and thousands of hoofed animals, primarily zebras and wildebeest. At this time of year, it was not uncommon for grass fires to be lit to burn off the dry grass and allow more nourishing new green shoots to sprout up. Our van passed quite close to one line of fire, and we found that it was causing a number of zebras and wildebeest to move on to get out of its way. The animals crossed the road in long lines right in front of our vehicle and then galloped away to the left. Try counting just the small herd of wildebeest filing past us here, and remember that the animals we are seeing are only scattered remnants of the incredible numbers of wildebeest which every year take part in the spectacular mass migration for which Serengeti is most famous. This generally takes place in May or June, when as many as 500,000 of these animals start the long overland trek which will take them north and west to where permanent water is available during the dry season. Then in November and December they return to these shortgrass plains to have their calves. But even these remaining summer animals made a tremendous impression on us as we watched them disappear in the dust under a sunset sky. The Lobo Wildlife Lodge, where we spent the next night, is a boldly designed architectural masterpiece. Located some 40 kilometers north of Saranera, it is built right into the gaps and contours of a massive rock promontory overlooking another part of the Serengeti Plains. We were absolutely awestruck walking around the many-leveled structure, which includes on top of the rocks an outdoor swimming pool with a magnificent view out over the plains. Comfortable sleeping quarters were provided in these three-story dormitories, with every picture window room having its own incomparable view. The next morning our extended Serengeti game drive continued, and at times we could see zebra and wildebeest covering the landscape in all directions as far as the eye could see. This was truly the Serengeti experience. At one stopping place we were able to film a large saddle-billed stork flying gracefully off with its great white wings flapping and then gliding down to a new landing spot. The beautiful impala are a thrill to watch as they bound high into the air, leaping over a small ravine. Following at the rear of this herd of females is their male master with his handsome set of horns. At noon on this great day, we stopped for a picnic lunch at the northern gatehouse to the park, not far from the border with Kenya. Our tour group was fortunate to have outstanding leaders. The tour director was a young man named Jim Heck, who had lived in East Africa himself for a number of years and had developed an excellent tourist operation known as Morgan Tours, with many key contacts of people and places. Dr. Donald Bruning was our traveling expert from the New York Zoological Society. He was the zoo's curator of ornithology, whose tremendous knowledge about birds was only matched by his personal warmth and enthusiasm. Of course, everyone had their own camera, but our group had the extra benefit of an experienced professional photographer named Ken Bertrand, whose superb snapshots provided a welcome supplement for the countless personal photos taken by Meg and the other tour members. On our way back to Saranera, we were able to observe another species of antelope known as the water buck, and again only the males have horns. These deer-like animals usually live near a supply of water. We counted 23 of them, making up this peaceful group in an open clearing. At sunrise the next day, we went on an early morning game drive and were rewarded by seeing a Kori bustard. These large, unusual birds look like a cross between a turkey and an ostrich. Although they are able to fly, they spend most of their time stalking around on the ground, looking for mice, snakes, and locusts to eat. Another very populous African bird of prey is the marabou stork. Before leaving Saranera, Meg wanted to get a close-up photo of these large, long-beaked birds, three of whom seemed to have taken up residence in front of the lodge. After a slow, respectful approach, Meg finally got them to pose, motionless, for a neat group portrait. We had mixed emotions when we finally departed the Serengeti, but there was one additional Tanzanian park which we wanted to see. My favorite vantage point when riding in the van was standing in the midsection with my head above the roof opening so I could see in all directions and call out the Swahili greeting of Jambo to anyone we met. The Arusha National Park, with entrance gate signs in both English and Swahili, was a much smaller park, but exceedingly lush with green rainforest trees covering the hillsides. It was here that we were to experience the single most exciting wildlife adventure of our entire trip. But first, let's exchange viewpoints with a giraffe. This giraffe is being looked at by a tourist who looks like this to the giraffe, while the giraffe looks like this to the tourist. The Arusha Park is noted for its distinctive populations of giraffe and elephants. As we were watching and filming this large group of giraffe, our van suddenly came to a stop, and we saw that there was a young elephant right in the middle of the road up ahead of us. Off to the right, there was a small herd of elephants, but the calf was blocking our way. One of the other minibuses was directly in front of us. After waiting quite a while, the first bus started moving slowly ahead, but when it did so, a large elephant with only one tusk moved out onto the road between us and the calf. It started flapping its ears and shaking its head as if threatening to charge us. Our drivers immediately backed up, not wanting to challenge a mother protecting her calf. Finally, after several near charges, the calf did move off to the right, and the large elephant moved into the brush on the left of the road. But then, when the vans drove forward again, passing between them, the giant female with one tusk emerged from the brush right beside our van, trumpeting wildly as we rushed past. That was truly a breathtaking encounter. As if to reassure us on our last day in Tanzania, Mount Kilimanjaro suddenly appeared from among the clouds on our way out of the park, giving us our first view of its magnificent snow-covered peak towering in the distance nearly 20,000 feet high. It was a fitting postlude for the first part of our trip and a dramatic prelude for the further adventures awaiting us when we flew north to the country of Kenya. Like Tanzania, Kenya is comparable in size to the state of Texas. It lies right on the equator, and during our 2 weeks there, we visited 8 of its great national parks. We started in the capital city of Nairobi, where there is this monumental statue of Jomo Kenyatta, the heroic native figure who became the first president of Kenya when the country won its independence from Britain in 1964. This is the 28-story Kenyatta Conference Center in the heart of Nairobi, on the top floor of which is a revolving restaurant. From this vantage point, one gets a panoramic view of both the rural outskirts and the crowded urban center of this bustling cosmopolitan city of more than 500,000 people. It has many high-rise hotels, office buildings, and apartment houses with attractive stores and tree-lined streets. We found it a fascinating mixture of old and new. Our overnight accommodations in Nairobi were at the world-famous New Stanley Hotel, said to be the crossroads of continents, where travelers from around the globe exchanged messages posted on the celebrated Thorn Tree message board right in the middle of the sidewalk cafe. Meg was surprised to find a personal note for herself there, which turned out to be from her husband inviting her to tea on the terrace. In Kenya, our group had a new set of minivans and drivers for our safari tours. Our first stop was at the Nairobi Park Animal Orphanage, where I was able to film behind a fenced enclosure a mother leopard being kept there for reasons of health. On 2 occasions on our trip, we did see wild leopards, but it was not possible for me to photograph them. With their brilliant colors, they are beautiful creatures. Within just a few miles of Nairobi, we encountered this wild rhino wandering across the road. Then we headed down the highway toward the Masai Amboseli Game Reserve. Along the way, we sighted a distant pair of giraffe, the first we had seen in Kenya, and a few scattered wildebeest. We got a good close-up view of a male ostrich, the only flightless bird native to Africa. The ostrich is the largest bird in the world, and though it can't fly, it can really run. We also came across a fine specimen of the silver-backed jackal. These handsome scavengers have a high-pitched bark which sounds like this. Would you mind stopping for a moment so we can get a picture? That's fine. Thank you very much. Now take a look at these two warthogs as they tear across the road with their tails straight up. The Amboseli Lodge, where we were to spend the next 2 nights, was a spread-out set of buildings and cottages on a flat, open area of ground without much shade. The larger main structure housed the dining room and a comfortable lounge and outdoor patio. At lunchtime, we enjoyed the company of a pair of superb starlings showing off their glossy iridescent plumage. As with all our game drives, each tour member was assigned to a designated vehicle with a particular driver. Many hours of close company riding by the 5 passengers and the skilled driver, who was on the front right side, created a strong bond among us. The Kenyan driver for our van was Joseph Kimathi, and he had a very warm personality, as well as being extremely knowledgeable about wildlife and an excellent driver. The remarkable thing about this scene was not the small pride of lions among the bushes beside this carcass of a zebra, but rather the incredible number of tourists it had attracted. It was almost completely surrounded by a total of 9 minibuses. We all agreed that this was too much. This old baboon didn't seem to think too highly of it either. Behind him, a whole troop of baboons was making its way across an open field, including males, females, and lots of babies. And then came Amboseli's elephants. Believe me, this experience was unforgettable. Driving down among some tall bushes, we found ourselves right in the midst of a whole herd of elephants, most of them taller than the tops of our vans, and almost close enough to touch. They were of all sizes and on all sides, as everyone kept taking picture after incredible picture. One large female, again with just one tusk, stepped out in front and faced our way, with a white egret on the ground before her. She clearly was issuing us a warning with her body movements and then a shrill trumpeting. We were somewhat relieved when, subsequently, the entire herd filed silently by right beside our van in a patient line. The one animal on our Big 10 list which we had not yet seen was the cheetah. But in one corner of the reserve, our drivers finally found a small group of cheetah sitting quietly on their haunches or lying on the ground in the shadows of bushes and trees. Their peaceful appearance belied their reputation as the fastest animal on earth, having been clocked chasing antelope at speeds of up to 60 miles an hour. Once again we were warned not to get out of the vans, but we were mesmerized by the sight of these beautiful creatures with their small heads and long, lean bodies and legs. They moved and sat with such grace and dignity, demonstrating their imperial disdain for the human interlopers in the big painted buses. Finally, we bid the cheetahs farewell, leaving their royal majesties to reign in peace over their own natural kingdom. Back at the lodge, for lunch, we were treated to a colorful display by the remarkable bird identified as the Eupupa epopas. It looked like a small hammerhead woodpecker, and its profile was as striking as its name. On our afternoon game drive that day, we had close seats for an unexpected demonstration of lion natural behavior. In an open field, we saw 2 males and 1 lioness. As we observed them coming together, it became clear which was the dominant male. With one male expelled from the grassy boudoir, we didn't have to wait long for the next occurrence. Almost before we knew what was happening, the dominant male was behind the female, mounting her and mating. The female remained passively lying on the ground while the male continued his unresisted activity right there in front of us, totally ignoring the presence of our vans. Finally, the male nipped the nape of the female's neck. She snarled and rolled over, and he disengaged himself and walked off. Viewing this was certainly an eye-opening experience. A short time later, we came upon a beautiful family scene with a mother lioness lying on the ground, peacefully surveying the scene with 3 young cubs lolling around her. The cubs also seemed unperturbed by the visiting tourists, and one walked over so close that a telephoto lens would have been useless. In the bushes nearby was the father lion, just giving an occasional yawn. Further on, it was a joy to see 2 beautifully horned male impala. And then we had an encounter with a species of antelope we had not seen before, the tiny dik-dik, the smallest of the antelopes. There were 2 of them in an open clearing, and the smaller one walked right over to where our van was, looked up at us with its large, luminous eye, and proceeded to defecate, dropping a stream of little black pellets to mark the border of its territory and let us know we were not to trespass beyond it. It was a very effective means of communication for so small a creature. At the other end of the size scale, the next day we witnessed a magnificent parade of elephants making their way through the bush to a new feeding location. This huge group included animals at all stages of development, from very young to very old, but no doubt all connected with family ties of one kind or another. What a marvelous sight this was as the whole herd moved by with Mount Kilimanjaro hidden behind the clouds in the background. In the heart of elephant territory in the Amboseli Game Range, we enjoyed the unique privilege of visiting the long-term campsite of wildlife researcher and author Cynthia Moss, whose famous book about animal behavior in East Africa I had brought with me. Cynthia was living here in a couple of large tents while completing a 4-year study of the over 400 elephant residents of Amboseli. She had compiled a mammoth photo directory with pictures and descriptions of each individual elephant, which she shared with us. While listening enthralled to her first-hand account of her fascinating work, we looked up and saw a huge bull tusker, whose name she said was Patrick, saunter by in the adjacent field. Her field studies were being supported by the New York Zoological Society. I was greatly impressed by the tremendous size of this elephant jawbone and its vegetarian-style teeth. We learned that African elephants live in a matriarchal society, and this was clearly evident in the extended family group which crossed our roadway when we were leaving the park. It was made up of adult females and young, and a number of small calves. The mature females appeared to be acting as crossing guards, trying to keep the calves surrounded by larger elephants. Tragically, despite strong conservation efforts by the governments of most East African countries, Africa's elephant populations have been declining drastically in recent years, from several million originally to a new estimated total of less than 1 million. They were being poached for their ivory, and their habitat was being decreased by encroachments due to the growth in human populations. When the oldest and largest matriarch in this group finally appeared, bringing up the rear, we hoped that Cynthia's research would help East Africa find new ways to assure the long-term survival of these magnificent animals for generations to come. One striking aspect of Kenyan society was its respect for extreme differences in culture and lifestyle. We had seen Western-like homes, businesses, and clothes in the urban setting of Nairobi. Now, en route to the next wildlife area, we were introduced to a rural boma with small clay huts surrounded by a protective thorn bush barrier. For a small fee, we were allowed to enter and photograph these Maasai tribespeople in their brightly colored garb while the children chanted a song to entertain us. Their nomadic cattle-tending lifestyle had remained essentially unchanged for centuries. Africans make up more than 98% of Kenya's population of 15 million people, and they include many different native tribes. The government's policy has been one of seeking peaceful coexistence for all of the country's contrasting cultures. The Tsavo National Park is the oldest national park in East Africa, having been created in 1948. Near its northwest border, there's a hillside covered with a massive lava flow of relatively recent origin. The Great Rift Valley runs through Kenya, and evidence of past volcanic eruptions were widespread in this area. Our main destination this day, however, after passing through the symbolic Rhino entrance gate, was the fabulous Kilaguni Lodge. Dating back to 1952, this was the first national park lodge designed and built for the express purpose of providing the best possible wildlife viewing for tourists. The stone-walled veranda overlooked an active waterhole with an incomparable background of plains, trees, hills, and mountains, which was frequented day and night by all kinds of animals and birds. Our favorite mealtime visitor was a red-billed hornbill, who had no hesitancy about picking up tidbits from the veranda wall and even from our outdoor dining tables. What a fantastic experience it was just to sit and look out over this quintessential African landscape. Even the ungainly marabou stork became a thing of beauty when it took to the air, spread its giant wings, and soared into the boundless sky. Tsavo was perhaps most famous for its elephants, which included lone bulls like this one, as well as large family herds. It was also not uncommon to see extensive herds of Cape buffalo here, in this largest of African national parks, embracing more than 8,000 square miles. One favorite stamping ground for both elephants and hippos was the famous Mzima Springs. Here we were able to get out of our vans and walk down to the edge of a large pond. In the shallow water on the other side of the pond was a mind-boggling assemblage of dust-coated elephants who had just come down to the springs for a drink, shower, and bath. Just standing there so close, watching them spray and dust each other with their hose-like trunks, was an unforgettable experience. In another part of the pond, there were several submerged hippos. All we could see of them were their eyes, nostrils, ears, and backs when they occasionally broke the surface to breathe, but the name hippopotamus does mean river horse. Leaving Tsavo, we headed north to visit more Kenyan parks, passing on the way a different species of zebra with much narrower stripes. These were called Grevy's zebra, and they are found only in northern Kenya. Not far from a picturesque waterfall, we got ready to board the Ark. This unique game viewing lodge is in the shape of a large boat built on an elevated promontory right in the heart of the forest in Aberdare National Park. After entering by way of a catwalk 2 by 2, we found that below the broad bow of this great wooden ship was a salt lick and marsh, which is visited day and night by a large variety of animals. We were too fascinated watching the wildlife in the illuminated oasis below us, like this pair of large rhinoceros, to get much sleep that night in our assigned staterooms. On our way out the next morning, we admired the great beauty and grace of these golden-crowned cranes, showing off their feathered finery. Driving further north to our next destination, we crossed the equator, and we all wanted to have the group's picture taken at the crossing sign to prove that we'd been there. The Samburu Lodge, lying along the banks of a northern jungle river, shaded by large tropical trees, had a storied African atmosphere to it. We spent 2 nights here, and the outdoor terrace was a dramatic sight from which to look for crocodiles along the banks or watch an elephant warily ford the shallow stream. On our game drives in the Samburu Reserve, we added several new species, like this reticulated giraffe, to our filmed trophies list. One of the most interesting new species was the gerenuk, known as the giraffe gazelle. It has a very long neck and often stands on its hind legs to eat leaves from the higher branches of the thorn bushes. We also were fortunate to see a large herd of oryx, a beautiful endangered antelope with long, straight horns. The markings on the reticulated species of giraffe here have a much clearer, sharper pattern in contrast to the irregular fig leaf splotches on this Maasai giraffe seen earlier. White bordered rectangular patches like those shown here distinguish the reticulated giraffe found only in the north. On the last leg of our trip, heading back south, we enjoyed lunch in the cooling mist of the tall Thompson's Falls, and then stopped at the famous Lake Nakuru National Park to view the incredible array of bird life which covered its shores. Flamingos predominated, but there were also pelicans, cormorants, ibis, storks, and countless others. Before returning to Nairobi for our plane flight home from Africa, this time passing green, cultivated farmlands, as our minibus drivers showed their great skill in maneuvering over rough terrain, we had one more special African safari experience. We spent 2 nights at the Masai Mara Buffalo Camp, sleeping on large platform tents under thatched roofs right beside the Mara River. A friendly mongoose was the camp mascot. Emerging from our tent under the thatched roof in the morning, walking to the main house for breakfast, we observed in the rushing river alongside us a hippo, though all we could see were its nostrils. Later, on a foot safari, we found both the hippo's swimming pool and their lounging beach. Kenya's first president, Jomo Kenyatta, called his country's wildlife a priceless heritage for the future. Tourism provides essential income for preserving it, and viewing the game on these vast plains for the last time, we hope that our visit had helped toward their conservation for future generations. The Swahili phrase for beautiful is mzuri sana. After a farewell dinner at the Masai Kikoro Lodge, we all expressed our joy and gratitude with these Swahili words.
We hope you've enjoyed this Barstow travel adventure film. We'll be releasing more of Robin Barstow's home movies on this YouTube channel during 2021. Click here to subscribe and receive the latest updates. Meanwhile, enjoy these other films by a master of home movie storytelling in the pre-digital era.